Chapter 1. Birth and Bloodline. The year was 1431, and the bitter air of winter wrapped itself around the hills of Transylvania like a shroud. In the small but vital town of Saisawara, among its cobbled streets and narrow timber-bird houses, a child was born whose life would become one of the most infamous in the history of Europe. His name was Vlad, son of Vlad II, later known as Dracul. The boy would earn another name, one whispered for centuries after his death: Dracula, the son of the dragon. His father was no ordinary noble. Vlad II had been inducted into the Order of the Dragon, a knightly fellowship sworn to protect Christian lands from the ever-advancing tide of the Ottoman Empire. The dragon sigil, fierce and coiled, symbolized not only martial valor, but a secret brotherhood devoted to the ruthless defense of the faith. For the boy, it meant more than a title. It meant a destiny shaped in the shadow of constant war, betrayal, and bloodshed. The land into which he was born was not stable nor forgiving. Wallachia, the principality his father ruled, was neither vast nor rich, yet its location made it a fulcrum for empires. To the north, the Hungarian crown glared southward, always wary of Ottoman encroachment. To the east and south, the Ottoman Sultan loomed as an ever-hungry predator, demanding tribute and submission. Within Wallachia itself, the great boyar families wielded their own power, eager to pull princes from their thrones and install new rulers at their whim. In such a land, a ruler could not afford to be weak, nor could a child of the throne afford to grow soft. Vlad's early life was steeped in whispers of intrigue. At feasts, as men drank from silver goblets, they spoke of betrayal and blood. At monasteries, priests prayed for the safety of the land, knowing full well that prayer alone could not stop Ottoman raiders. And in the household of his father, young Vlad absorbed the idea that loyalty was fragile, trust was fleeting, and survival required vigilance sharper than any sword. The boy learned that even kin could be the seeds of treachery. In later centuries, storytellers and pamphleteers would depict his birth as ominous. Some claimed that the heavens split with thunder on the night he came into the world, as if fate itself announced the arrival of a soul marked for cruelty. Others whispered that he was born with teeth already sharp, biting the breast of his wet nurse until blood flowed. Whether fact or fable, these tales reveal how deeply his reputation infected the imagination of Europe. They wanted to believe that such a man had been marked from the first breath he drew. What is certain is this: Vlad was born into a crucible of conflict, where innocence could not survive, and where a prince could not merely inherit power, but must seize it, protect it, and wield it like a blade. Chapter 2. A Childhood in Captivity. In the year 1442, when Vlad was still a boy, the fragile balance of power shattered. His father, Vlad Dracul, needing Ottoman favor to preserve his throne, agreed to send two of his sons to the court of the Sultan as hostages. Thus, young Vlad, along with his younger brother Radu, was delivered to the iron heart of an empire that demanded obedience not through kindness, but through the crushing weight of fear. At the Ottoman court, the boys were not treated as common prisoners. They were the collateral of treaties, the living guarantees of their father's loyalty. Their education was rigorous. They learned Turkish, the language of the Sultan's court. They studied mathematics, philosophy, and military tactics. They were trained in the saddle, drilled in archery, and taught the arts of war. They lived in palaces adorned with intricate tiles and fountains. Yet they lived under the constant reminder that their lives hung by a thread. If their father betrayed the Sultan, their blood would pay the price. For Vlad, every meal could have been his last. Every smile from an Ottoman tutor could have hidden a knife. The boy learned suspicion. He learned that fear is a tool, and that power, when displayed, enslaves the heart as surely as chains bind the limbs. His younger brother Radu thrived in captivity, charming his hosts, learning their ways, and even winning favor with Sultan Mehmed. But Vlad was different. He simmered with hatred. He saw the Ottomans not as teachers, but as oppressors. Their refinement, their wealth, their authority only deepened his resolve. He absorbed their methods, but twisted them inward, vowing one day to wield their own tools of terror against them and against any who opposed him. Captivity marked him. It scarred him. The lessons he carried away from those years were cruel, yet indelible. He understood that mercy without strength invites betrayal. He understood that spectacle is as vital as the sword. A punishment displayed is more powerful than a punishment whispered. And he understood, too, that fear could bind men to a ruler more securely than love ever could. These ideas, planted in his youth, would become the foundations of his reign and the engines of his cruelty. Chapter 3. The first taste of power. In 1448, Vlad briefly seized the throne of Wallachia. He was still young, untested, and his hold on power was as fragile as parchment in a storm. With Ottoman support, he ousted his rival Vladislav and declared himself voivode. Yet the victory was hollow. The boyars, ever fickle, doubted him. Hungary, looming to the north, refused to recognize him. His reign lasted only a matter of months before he was driven out. That fleeting grasp of power taught Vlad another lesson. The throne was not a chair one inherited. It was a battlefield upon which one must slaughter rivals, shatter conspiracies, and carve out obedience through terror. To be voivode meant little unless one could be feared. Without fear, loyalty meant nothing. Without fear, the throne was an empty title. Driven into exile, Vlad wandered between Moldavia and Transylvania, seeking patrons, gathering a small retinue of hardened men. His enemies mocked him as a prince. Without a land, but he never let go of the vision that burned in him. He would return. He would reclaim the throne. And when he did, he would not make the mistake of gentleness that every betrayal he suffered, every whispered insult, every dismissal of his claim hardened him further. He began to dream of a reign that would not merely rule Wallachia, but terrify it into obedience. He began to imagine punishment not as a tool of justice, but as a weapon of theater, a stage upon which he would act out the unshakable authority of the voivode. Chapter 4. The Road Back. By the mid-1450s, Europe was convulsing. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453 sent shockwaves across Christendom. Hungary, desperate to hold the line of the Danube, sought allies who could resist Ottoman advance. Vlad saw his chance. With Hungarian support, he returned to Wallachia in 1456. This time, his return was not the fleeting grasp of a child. It was the march of a hardened exile, blood-hungry and resolute. Vladislav, his rival, was defeated. Vlad seized the throne once more. And now, he set about reshaping Wallachia into a realm bound not by persuasion, but by iron discipline. He knew his boyars would conspire. He knew merchants would cheat. He knew the peasants, weary of endless wars, would dream of disobedience. He resolved to crush them all. Order would be forged not in negotiation, but in blood. Terror would be his language, and cruelty his law. The boy who had once tasted captivity now became the man who imposed captivity upon an entire land. His reign, beginning with purges and ending in a legacy of horror, would etch his name into legend. And it would be a legend soaked in blood. Chapter 5. The Easter Purge. The bells of Easter tolled across Targovekt, ringing bright in the spring air as families lit candles and shared in the sacred feast. Yet within the prince's hall, another ritual unfolded, one destined to stain Wallachia's memory in terror. Vlad, the newly restored voivode, had summoned the boyars, the proud lords who for generations had made and unmade rulers. They came adorned in silks and furs, their hands heavy with rings, their voices haughty, their eyes glinting with the assumption that they, as always, would judge the prince. Not the other way around. The feast was lavish. Platters of roasted lamb and sweet breads were carried in by servants. Goblets overflowed with red wine that caught the firelight like liquid blood. Laughter filled the air, yet beneath the laughter lingered unease. The young prince sat silent, his eyes piercing, his gaze moving from face to face. He had invited them with courtesy, but in his silence lay something heavy, something darker than any host should show his guests. Then he spoke. His voice cut through the hall like a blade. He demanded an accounting of their loyalties. He asked who among them had betrayed his father. He asked who had raised swords for Vladislav, who had whispered treachery, who had bled the land for personal gain while Wallachia drowned in enemies. The laughter died. Silence reigned. Some stammered excuses. Some protested their innocence. Vlad's face never changed. The doors slammed shut. Guards entered, armed with pikes and swords. The boyars were seized, dragged screaming from their benches. The old men, too frail to march, were impaled on stakes outside the city walls before the sun set, their bodies left writhing in agony as carrion birds circled. The younger nobles, the ones who had thought themselves immune, were bound and forced on a grueling march north into the Arjak Valley. Their destination was the ruined fortress of Ponari, perched on a cliff like an eagle's nest above the river. Vlad ordered them to rebuild it stone by stone, brick by brick. The march itself became a trial of death. Many collapsed under the weight of chains. Others, unused to labor, died of exhaustion. Those who faltered were struck down or left to rot by the roadside. When the survivors at last staggered into the valley, they became slaves to the prince's ambition. Noblemen who once dined in gilded halls now broke their hands on stone. Women and children, dragged along in chains, carried timber until their backs bent and cracked. The fortress rose again, rebuilt with blood and tears, its walls cemented with the agony of those who once thought themselves kings in their own right. By the time the work was finished, few of the boyars remained alive. Some perished from hunger and disease. Others were impaled along the cliffs, their bodies dangling above the valley as a warning to all who dared defy him. Vlad had not merely punished traitors. He had shattered the aristocracy's power in a single stroke. The boyars who remained alive understood the message. The age of bargaining was over. The prince was no longer a client of noble favor. He was absolute, and his law was written in blood. The purge spread fear like a plague. Villagers whispered of the feast turned massacre. Merchants told each other in trembling voices that the voivode had no patience for deceit. Mothers hushed their children by speaking his name as a curse. And above it all, Vlad sat in his hall, cold and resolute, convinced that only terror could forge loyalty, and only cruelty could keep a realm intact. Chapter 6. Order in blood. Vlad's rule hardened like iron under fire. He believed that justice must not only be served, it must be seen. He turned his lands into a theater of horror, where each crime became a performance, and each punishment a spectacle that chained obedience to fear. Stories multiplied. Some were true, some exaggerated, but all served his purpose. In one tale, he placed a golden goblet at the public fountain in Targovik, where every passerby could see it gleam. The cup remained untouched for months, for everyone knew that to steal, it was to die by the stake. In another story, a merchant complained that his goods had been stolen while passing through the land. Vlad ordered a swift investigation. The thief was hunted down, executed by impalement, and displayed at the roadside. Yet the voivode did not stop there. He forced the merchant himself to leave a purse of equal value in the place where the theft had occurred. Only when the purse remained untouched by any hand did Vlad declare justice complete. This was the logic of his reign. Fear was not only a punishment, it was a currency. With it, he bought order in a land long torn by disorder, but the punishments grew darker. Vlad's preferred method was impalement, a punishment both slow and obscene. Victims were stripped naked, their bodies pierced with sharpened stakes, driven through the torso, the rectum or the chest, sometimes exiting through the mouth or shoulder. The stakes were raised upright, and the condemned left to writhe in unspeakable agony for hours, even days, as crowds were forced to watch. The smell of blood and human waste filled the air, while vultures picked at living flesh. The prince insisted on public display, lining roads with impaled corpses, turning the land itself into a gallery of horror. A thief might be impaled beside a murderer, a corrupt tax collector beside a priest who blessed rebellion. Even peasants accused of harboring bandits were dragged into fields of stakes. Whole villages were destroyed this way, every man, woman, and child driven to the same fate. Estimates vary, but the number of executions by impalement during his reign is said to reach into the tens of thousands. Foreign travelers recoiled in horror. German pamphlets circulated tales of mass impalements, each more gruesome than the last. Yet peasants whispered that the roads were safe, that they could travel without fear of bandits. Merchants admitted that while the land was cruel, it was orderly. Terror had become a strange kind of peace, but peace bought in such currency corrodes the soul. For every crime prevented, another soul was broken. For every village kept safe, another was annihilated in spectacle. Wallachia had become a prison without walls, its people bound not by love of their prince, but by terror of his wrath. Chapter 7. The Sultan's Fury. In 1461, the fragile balance collapsed. The Ottoman Sultan demanded tribute. Vlad refused. Instead, he crossed the Danube with fire and sword, striking into Ottoman garrisons, burning villages, slaughtering defenders, and driving terror into the heart of the empire itself. He left behind not just ashes, but stakes planted with the bodies of soldiers and civilians alike. When news reached Constantinople, Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople and ruler of an empire that stretched across 3 continents, was enraged. In the spring of 1462, he marched north with one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen. Chroniclers claim numbers in the hundreds of thousands, though the truth was smaller. Still, it was a force vast enough to crush Wallachia many times over. Vlad could not meet such an army in open battle. He turned terror. His men burned crops, poisoned wells, and slaughtered livestock. Entire villages were emptied. The peasants either fled or impaled, leaving nothing for the invaders to seize. The Ottomans advanced into a wasteland, their soldiers harassed by raiding parties, their morale poisoned by fear. Then they came upon it. The sight that has haunted chronicles for centuries. A forest of stakes. Row upon row, thousands of corpses skewered upright, their limbs twisted, their faces frozen in the grimaces of death. Men, women, even children. Some freshly killed, their wounds still bleeding. Others rotting, their flesh blackened by decay, swarming with flies. Ravens perched upon the bodies, plucking eyes from skulls. Wolves prowled the edges of the grotesque forest. Estimates vary, but some accounts speak of 20,000 impaled bodies. Others fewer, others more. The truth is uncertain, but the effect was beyond question. Hardened Ottoman soldiers, veterans of sieges and conquests, recoiled. Even Mehmed himself, whose empire thrived on conquest, is said to have been shaken by the spectacle. That night, Vlad struck again. Under the cover of darkness, he led a daring raid into the Ottoman camp. Disguised in Ottoman clothing, his men infiltrated the campfires, sowing chaos with fire, sword, and shrieking cries. His goal was the Sultan's own tent, to cut off the serpent's head in a single strike. He failed to kill Mehmed, but the carnage he unleashed turned the camp into a nightmare. Horses screamed. Soldiers killed each other in confusion. Tents collapsed in flame. By dawn, the Ottomans had held, but they had felt terror like few had known before. Vlad's cruelty had transcended punishment. It had become a weapon of war, wielded not only against enemies, but against the very soul of his land. Chapter 8. Suppressing Dissent. Victory against the Ottomans did not soften Vlad's hand. If anything, it hardened him further. He returned to Wallachia, determined to cleanse his realm of treachery. The boyars were already broken, but merchants and Saxon traders still defied his customs, smuggling goods across the mountains. When envoys from Brasov protested, he had them seized and impaled along the trade routes. Entire caravans were burned, their drivers left to rot on spikes as warnings to their kin. Villages suspected of harboring bandits were annihilated. Men were impaled, women mutilated, children thrown into rivers or burned alive in huts. The land itself seemed to scream beneath the weight of his punishments. Priests who dared to bless rebellion or speak of mercy from their pulpits were dragged into public squares, their heads nailed to church doors, their bodies left to the crows. Refugees fled north into Transylvania, their tales of horror carried into Saxon towns. Printers in the German lands seized upon these stories, embellishing them into lurid pamphlets. Woodcut images showed Vlad feasting at tables surrounded by impaled corpses, or calmly eating as men were boiled alive before him. These pamphlets, sold across Europe, painted him as a devil in human form. His name became synonymous with sadism, cruelty, and blood. Yet within Wallachia, there were whispers of approval. Roads were safer than they had been in decades. Bandits who once terrorized the countryside vanished. The peasants, though terrified, admitted that at least they could sleep without fear of raiders. The price was steep, but it bought a grim order. Still, dissent could not be fully extinguished. Every act of brutality created more enemies. Every stake planted along the roadside deepened the hatred of those who survived. Vlad's circle grew smaller, composed of men bound to him by fear, loyalty, or shared guilt. And as the walls of paranoia closed in, Vlad himself began to change. The boy raised in captivity had become a man whose kingdom was a prison. But now, the prison closed upon the jailer himself. Chapter 9. A mind under siege. The longer Vlad ruled, the more his cruelty began to consume not only his enemies, but his own mind. Fear had become his instrument, his law, his constant companion. Yet the ruler who builds a throne of terror must live upon it alone. For no love surrounds such a seat. At first, his brutality was purposeful, aimed at boyars, at thieves, at Ottomans. But as the years dragged on, whispers spread that the voivode no longer punished only the guilty. His hand struck out at shadows, at rumors, at imagined betrayals. A courtier who spoke too softly in the prince's hall found himself accused of conspiracy. A commander who hesitated in battle found himself impaled beside deserters. Servants who dropped a goblet, who stumbled when bowing, who failed to meet their master's eye. Even these small lapses could lead to torment and death. Vlad no longer trusted the boyars he had spared. He no longer trusted his captains. He no longer trusted his own kin. His paranoia deepened into obsession. He would sit in silence for hours, staring at the fire, muttering of plots. His counselors learned to remain silent, for to question him was to risk suspicion. Those who spoke too quickly risked death. Those who remained too quiet risked death. It was said that he prowled his chambers at night, sleepless, his eyes burning, his hands trembling. The nightmares of captivity returned to him. He saw the Ottomans everywhere. He saw treachery in every whisper of wind. His brutality had been a weapon. Now it was his refuge, the only language he trusted. He began to kill not only to enforce obedience, but to silence the voices of doubt that screamed in his mind. And still, the impalements multiplied. Fields of stakes stretched beyond city walls. Travelers spoke of the forests of death that lined the roads. Flies swarmed in clouds, the stench of rotting corpses suffocated villages, and wolves grew fat on human flesh. Wallachia had become not only a realm, but a graveyard. And at its center sat a prince who had made himself prisoner to his own terror. Chapter 10. Blood of Kin. Among the darkest whispers of Vlad's reign are those that accuse him of turning even against his own blood. Chroniclers differ, and legends grow like weeds around his name. Yet the stories remain, blackening his memory. It was said that he slew one of his wives in a fit of rage. When Ottoman armies approached the fortress of Ponari, his wife, seeing no escape, is said to have leapt from the cliffs into the river far below, her body broken upon the rocks. Some claimed she did so willingly, preferring death to capture. Others claimed she had been driven to despair by her husband's madness. Another tale, darker still, tells that he killed one of his own children. The records here are clouded, woven with propaganda and rumor. One story tells of a mistress who claimed to be pregnant. When Vlad doubted her, he had her belly slit open to prove her lie, spilling both womb and child upon the floor. Another story, whispered by Saxon pamphleteers eager to blacken his name, claims that Vlad in his fury struck down a son he deemed unworthy or disloyal. Whether truth or slander, the tale took root, for it seemed to fit the measure of his character. What ruler who filled the land with the blood of strangers would not, in his madness, turn his hand against his own? Whether he killed his heir or not, what is certain is this: Vlad believed family gave no protection from his law. His brother Radu had already become his enemy, siding with the Ottomans. Other kin he distrusted, exiling some, imprisoning others. The bloodline that should have secured his rule became another battlefield dot to his subjects. These stories became both warning and curse. If even a child of the dragon's blood could be slaughtered, what hope had the peasant, the merchant, the soldier? If even kin were impaled, what mercy could any man expect? Chapter 11. The Arrest and the Years of Chains. By 1462, Vlad's wars had brought him enemies too powerful to resist. His brother Radu, favored by the Ottomans, marched against him with Turkish troops. Hungary, once his ally, now regarded him with suspicion. Rumors spread that Vlad sought separate terms with the Turks. Some whispered that forged letters were circulated by his enemies. Framing him as a traitor, King Matthias Corvinus, ruler of Hungary, seized his chance. He arrested Vlad, declaring him untrustworthy, a liability too dangerous to leave free. Shackled, the voivode was carried away in chains. For years, he lingered in captivity. At first, his confinement was harsh. He languished in dungeons, iron biting his wrists, rats gnawing at scraps in the darkness. Yet even here, his cruelty seeped into legend. Chronicles tell that he impaled rats upon bits of wood in his cell, mocking his captors with miniature forests of death. His obsession with punishment never left him. Over time, conditions eased. He was moved from dungeon to guarded estates, allowed to hunt, permitted to marry a noblewoman kin to the Hungarian king. But the iron never left his soul. He was a prince in exile, a dragon chained, his throne usurped by his brother, his land bleeding under Ottoman tribute. In the silence of captivity, his paranoia festered deeper. Those years hardened him further. To some, it seemed captivity might break him, taming the monster into a weary relic. But Vlad's fury did not weaken. It simmered. He plotted, he dreamed, and he waited for the hour when fortune would turn once more. Chapter 12. The Last Return. Fortune is Fickle. In 1476, with Ottoman pressure rising again, Hungary released Vlad and armed him. The voivode returned to Wallachia, his heart blackened by exile, his will sharpened by years of chains. For a brief season, he was prince again. His return was not triumphant. The land had grown weary of his cruelty. His enemies were many, his friends few. Yet Vlad cared nothing for love. He sought only to carve his power once more in the flesh of men. His final reign was short but soaked in blood. He launched campaigns against the Turks, against rivals, against villages that had shifted their loyalties. Impalements returned in dreadful numbers. Fields were once again lined with stakes, bodies rotting beneath the sun, the forests of death reawakened. Merchants who opposed him were executed. Nobles who doubted him were purged, but his enemies closed in. In December of 1476, Vlad marched toward Bucharest. There, in the marshes near Comana, he met his end. The battle was chaos. Some say Ottoman soldiers cut him down. Others whisper his own men turned upon him, mistaking him in the night or betraying him in the press of combat. His head, severed, was sent to Constantinople, displayed before the Sultan as proof that the dragon was slain. His body's resting place remains uncertain. Some claim it lies in the monastery at Snagov, others at Comana. His grave is unmarked, his bones lost. Yet his legend never lay quiet. Chapter 13, Counting the Dead. The chronicles speak in numbers, but the numbers stagger the mind. Some claim Vlad impaled 20,000 in a single campaign. Others whisper of 40,000. Still others inflate the total to 100,000, as if no boundary could contain his appetite for blood. The truth lies somewhere between propaganda and fact. Yet even the most cautious count reveals a harvest of corpses unlike anything Wallachia had ever known. Imagine the roads from Brasov to Targovekt lined with bodies. Not one or two, but mile after mile, stakes rising like a ghastly forest, their sharpened points piercing the sky. The dead and the dying moan in chorus, their voices mingling with the cries of carrion birds. Horses shy away from the stench. Riders gag behind gloved hands. Peasants hurry past with heads bowed, too terrified even to whisper a prayer. These were not only soldiers caught in battle. Among the impaled were merchants, peasants, women, and even children. A thief dragged from the marketplace. A woman accused of adultery. A boy suspected of carrying a message for rebels. No station, no age, no rank offered safety. Foreigners recoiled in horror. Ambassadors wrote trembling letters home. German pamphleteers seized the tailies and spread them across Europe, painting Vlad not as a prince, but as a demon in human form. The pamphlets spoke of him dining among the dead, lifting his goblet as impaled men screamed around him, dipping his bread in their blood as if savoring the feast of suffering. Whether exaggerated or not, the tailies captured the essence of his reign. For Vlad, cruelty was not a secret sin. It was a public declaration. He wanted the world to know. He wanted the world to tremble. How many died? No one can know for certain. But the fields of Wallachia, the valleys of the Carpathians, the banks of the Danube, all bore witness to forests of stakes. The land itself became a grave, and its people became a warning written in flesh. Chapter 14, Propaganda and Reputation. The stories of Vlad's cruelty spread faster than any army. In the towns of Saxony, pamphlets were sold that showed woodcut images of him at feasts surrounded by impaled corpses. Of him boiling men alive, of him slicing the breasts of women and forcing their husbands to eat them. Some tailies spoke of him nailing turbans to the heads of Ottoman envoys who refused to remove them in his presence. Others claimed he roasted children on spits, feeding them to their mothers before impaling the women as well. These stories blurred truth and invention, fact and slander. Yet they all shared one truth: Vlad ruled by spectacle. Whether he truly feasted among the impaled, or whether this was an invention of his enemies, mattered little. What mattered was that people believed it. The fear it inspired was real. Even his allies spread the tailies. Hungarian chroniclers, seeking to justify his imprisonment, painted him as a beast too dangerous to roam free. Ottoman writers depicted him as a savage barbarian, a warning of what awaited those who defied the Sultan. Saxon merchants, whose trade he crippled, portrayed him as a tyrant who delighted in blood. And yet, in Slavic lands, another narrative survived. There he was remembered not as a monster, but as a stern ruler who defended Christendom, who punished the wicked, who imposed justice on a land long torn by chaos. For them, his cruelty was the price of order, his bloodshed the shield of the frontier. Thus his reputation fractured. To some, he was the devil. To others, he was a hero. To all, he was unforgettable. Chapter 15. The texture of his brutality. For a mature audience, we must speak plainly of the horrors that Vlad imposed. Impalement was not merely execution. It was desecration of the body, a stripping away of dignity, the turning of death into a slow theater of agony. The stake was sharpened, sometimes oiled, sometimes not. The condemned was stripped naked, bound, and forced upon the point. In some cases, the stake entered through the rectum and emerged through the mouth. In others, it pierced the abdomen or chest, rising upward to hold the body aloft. Careful executioners could place the stake so as to avoid vital organs, prolonging death for hours, even days. The victim writhed, screamed, begged, until exhaustion stole their voice. Blood soaked the ground, mixing with filth, with sweat, with excrement. Birds circled above. Dogs lurked nearby, waiting for scraps. Vlad demanded that the stakes be erected publicly, in marketplaces, along roads, before city gates. No passerby could avoid them. No traveler could claim ignorance. A man riding to market would find his path lined with writhing bodies. A mother leading her child to church would see the crucifix echoed in twisted, screaming forms, nor was impalement his only cruelty. Some he boiled alive in great cauldrons, their screams echoing across the square. Others he skinned, their flayed bodies hung upon the gates. Some were hacked to pieces, their limbs nailed to doors as warnings. He gouged eyes, cut off noses, mutilated the unfaithful, burned villages to ash. He turned death into spectacle. He transformed justice into terror. He believed that cruelty was not a flaw, but a necessity. And so he built his realm on corpses, believing that only by planting fear like a crop could he reap obedience as a harvest. Chapter 16. Did he lose himself? At first, his cruelty was calculated. Each impalement was a message, each massacre a lesson. But over time, the line between purpose and obsession blurred. The more he punished, the more he saw enemies in every shadow. The more he relied on terror, the more he feared betrayal. His court became a place of silence. No one dared to speak freely. No one dared to meet his eye too long. Counselors gave him only the words he wished to hear, for to contradict him was to risk the stake. Servants trembled at every command. His captains obeyed blindly, knowing that hesitation would mean death. Did Vlad descend into madness? Or did he merely follow the logic of terror to its inevitable end? Some chroniclers claimed he laughed as men screamed, that he dined among the impaled, that he lost all trace of pity. Others argued he remained coldly rational, wielding cruelty as a deliberate weapon, never swayed by emotion. The truth may be both, for cruelty, when practiced so relentlessly, becomes its own addiction. Each act demands another. Each spectacle must outdo the last. What began as policy became obsession. What began as a tool became a prison. Vlad himself was trapped within the world of terror he had created. He had made himself the master of fear, but in the end, he was also its slave. Chapter 17. Did he lose himself? When a man chooses fear as his crown, he becomes bound to it more tightly than any chain. Vlad's cruelty had begun as policy, a way to forge obedience where loyalty was brittle and treachery common. Yet by the last years of his reign, cruelty was no longer simply a tool. It had become a language he could not stop speaking. Every council meeting was soaked in suspicion. Every whisper in the hall sounded like conspiracy. His captains could not tell whether he punished because betrayal had truly been discovered, or because his restless mind demanded new victims. A man might fall because he had failed in his duty, or because Vlad's sleepless eyes had dreamed of him in a plot dot at night. Servants claimed they heard him pacing, muttering to himself, his voice rising in sharp bursts, as if arguing with invisible judges. Sometimes he laughed, not the laughter of joy, but of bitterness, harsh and hollow, echoing through the stone halls like the cry of a raven dot. To live in his presence was to live before a storm. No one knew when lightning would strike. No one knew when the thunder would break. Fear bound the land together, yet fear also devoured it. The prince who once calculated terror with deliberate care had become a creature unable to imagine any other path. This is how terror corrupts the soul of the ruler as surely as it corrupts the lives of the ruled. Vlad may have begun as the son of the dragon, a warrior who used cruelty to survive. But he ended as a man imprisoned in his own brutality, unable to see his people, unable to hear their voices, unable to imagine a world not painted in blood. Chapter 18. The Man and the Country. To understand Vlad fully, one must understand Wallachia itself. It was not a land of peace. It was a frontier torn by rival powers, its soil soaked with centuries of invasion. To the north lay Hungary, wary and grasping. To the south stretched the Ottoman Empire, insatiable and merciless. To the west lay the Saxon merchants of Transylvania, who wielded trade as a weapon. And within Wallachia itself, the boyars clawed at the throne like wolves, each willing to sell the land for their own advantage. In such a land, a gentle ruler would not survive. Mercy was seen as weakness, and weakness invited conquest. A prince who bent too far toward compromise would find his throne stolen by rivals, his body hanging headless before the gates, his family scattered or enslaved. Thus Vlad's choices, as cruel as they were, cannot be torn from the soil that made them. He believed that only terror could bind Wallachia together. He believed that only a ruler feared more than the Sultan or the Hungarian king could preserve the throne. He believed that justice without blood was no justice at all. And for a time, he succeeded. The roads were safe. The treasury grew. The Ottomans, though vast, found themselves stalled by a single defiant prince. Hungary, though powerful, struggled to control him. The peasants, though terrified, lived under a law that was iron, harsh, but predictable. Yet this order was bought at the cost of souls. Each impaled corpse bought another season of safety. Each mass execution bought another year of stability. The land was governed, yes, but governed by fear. And fear corrodes. Fear burns. Fear poisons. In the end, it poisoned him his court, and his country alike. Chapter 19. Legacy and Judgment. Vlad's death did not end his story. In truth, it began it. His head, delivered to the Ottoman Sultan, was displayed for all to see, the ultimate spectacle of triumph. His body's burial is uncertain. Some claim Snagov Monastery, others Komana, and then there are others Wozi. His bones were scattered, denied the peace of earth, yet his memory did not scatter. It grew. The German pamphlets spread lurid tales of his cruelty across Europe. The Slavic chronicles praised him as a stern defender of the frontier. Hungarian scribes condemned him as a liability. Ottoman accounts cursed him as a barbarian. And the peasants whispered both fear and admiration, saying that though he was cruel, at least he made the land safe. Centuries later, the name Dracula was reborn in literature, divorced from the Wallachian throne, and reshaped into something supernatural. The vampire of Stoker's imagination was not the historical Vlad, but the echo of his cruelty gave the myth its teeth. And thus his legend endured, in two forms, one of history, one of horror. He was a ruler born of chaos, who answered chaos with terror. He was a man who chose cruelty not as accident, but as law. He was a patriot who defended his country, and a tyrant who destroyed it. His name lives on, not because he was loved, but because he was feared. And sometimes fear leaves a deeper mark than love ever can.